far across the Omniverse, in a place that had no name recognizable to anyone in Universe 7, something had been watching all of it. The location was dark in a way that felt deliberate, not the absence of light, but the active and purposeful suppression of it, a darkness maintained by design rather than circumstance. Within it, a collection of gods gathered without urgency, without drama, with the ease of entities that had been patient for a very long time and had made a practice of finding satisfaction in the waiting itself. Their names were unfamiliar: Arachnor, Turon, Megor, Kano, Megalodorus. They carried no traceable origin. They belonged to no known universe and no identified timeline. They simply existed, present with the total comfort of beings that had never needed permission from the known order of things to occupy space within it. And then the signal came, not as sound, not as light, not as any sensation that the gods of the known multiverse would have recognized as communication. It arrived the way certainty arrives when it has been building for a very long time in the dark. Completely, without ceremony, without the courtesy of a warning. A single pulse from somewhere so deep in the architecture of existence that the known multiverse had no name for the place it originated. One command, absolute, unambiguous, the great king had spoken. Megalodorus did not move immediately. He stood in the dark and let the signal settle through him the way a stone settles through deep water, slowly, completely, touching every layer on the way down. Then he looked at the others, one by one, with the calm of an entity who had been holding a very large thing in trust for a very long time, and had finally been given permission to set it down. "It is time," he said. The others divided without discussion. The assignments had been established long before this moment, had been established in the watching, in the patient accumulation of observation across distances that no standard unit of measurement could express. Arachnor took his direction without ceremony. Turon and Megor moved together, 2 points of the same calculation resolving toward the same answer from different angles. The larger targets, Primos, Reno, Grizzler, had been accounted for. The architecture of what was coming had been designed with the precision of gods who had done this kind of work before, and had learned from the times it had not gone as intended. Kano did not move with the others. He remained in the dark after the rest had gone, standing in the particular stillness of an entity whose attention had been fixed on a single point for so long that the fixation had become something indistinguishable from purpose. He looked, not with his eyes, but with something older than sight, across the vast and uncountable distance between where he stood and the small, scarred planet in Universe 7, where a Saiyan was sitting on the edge of a training platform, with his legs hanging over the side and his eyes half closed. He had been watching Son Goku for a long time. He had watched him fight Beerus above a cruise ship when the concept of a mortal challenging a god of destruction had still been considered a category error. Had watched him press Jiren to limits that a being forged in the crucible of the Tournament of Power had not expected to encounter. Had watched him find Ultra Instinct not once but repeatedly. Had watched him reach for it and lose it and reach for it again with the particular stubbornness of someone who had decided that the reaching mattered more than the outcome of any single attempt. He had watched all of it. And what he had concluded, after all the watching, was that Son Goku was not simply a strong fighter. He was something rarer and more specific than that. He was a fighter who could not be finished by force alone, who had to be shown something, had to be given a reason, before the deepest part of him would unlock. Every true leap Goku had ever made had been preceded by a moment of genuine necessity, Not artificial pressure, not manufactured stakes. The real thing. Kano intended to provide the real thing. He moved. The wrongness arrived before anything visible did. Goku felt it the way he felt most things that mattered, in his body first, before his mind had assembled the question. He had been sitting at the edge of the platform in the loose, half-present state he occupied between rest and readiness, letting the weight of everything that had happened settle through him at its own pace. The battle with Kefla, the tournament of power, Broly, the three-universe contest, Liger and Beerus and the things Liger had said before leaving, the tournament coming, the dark gods without origin, the instruction to grow beyond where they currently were delivered, with the quiet conviction of a God who meant it as fact rather than encouragement. He had been sitting with all of it, turning it over when the frequency shifted. It was subtle enough that anyone without his particular sensitivity would have missed it entirely. A change in the quality of the air, not the temperature, not the pressure, but something beneath both of those. Something in the register that his body had learned to read through years of encountering things that existed at the edges of what was supposed to be possible. The same resonance he had felt when he first shook Liger's hand. The same strangeness, but closer, and pointed directly at him. He opened his eyes. The sky was unchanged. The training ground was quiet. Vegeta was across the platform reviewing something in his mind, with the focused inward expression he wore when he was stress-testing a strategy he had not yet shared with anyone. Gohan was seated near the far wall. Broly stood at the edge of the cliff facing outward, the way he often stood when the scale of where he was hadn't finished registering yet. Everything looked exactly as it should. Goku stood up. Vegeta. The single word was enough. Vegeta's eyes came up immediately, already sharp, already tracking the same shift in the atmosphere that Goku's tone had communicated without explaining. He rose to his feet with the economy of movement that long experience with genuine threats had built into him. No wasted motion, no dramatic preparation, simply upright and oriented and ready before the readiness had been formally requested. "How close?" Vegeta said. "Close." Goku turned slowly, feeling for the direction the way a compass feels for north, not choosing it but being drawn by it. His hand drifted toward his side where his power lived and rested there, not gathering yet, just present, just making contact with what was available. It's one of them, one of the ones Ligur described. The silence that followed had a specific texture, the silence of people who have been told something is coming and have spent the interval since trying to prepare and are now discovering that the interval is over. Y-Eyes appeared beside Beerus with no transition, no approach, simply present in the way angels were present when a situation had moved past the stage where arrival could afford to be gradual. His expression carried the precise, undecorated alertness of someone who had been tracking a signal across a vast distance and had just watched it stop moving and begin to descend. Beerus did not need to be told. He was already standing with his eyes fixed on the same point in the distance that Goku had found, and what moved through his face was not fear. Beerus did not have a reliable relationship with fear, but the cold, crystalline focus of a god of destruction who had been tested beyond his limit hours ago and was now being asked to consider the possibility that the testing was not finished. "Whis," he said. "I know, Lord Beerus." "How many?" Whis' answer was careful in a way that communicated more than the words themselves. "One for now. The others have moved in other directions." A pause that carried weight. "This one came here specifically." Beerus' eyes moved to Goku. Goku felt the look land and understood what it meant without needing it explained. He nodded once, a small, quiet acknowledgement of something neither of them had said aloud. The first impact hit before anyone could speak another word. It did not build. It did not approach. It arrived the way things arrived when the being producing them had decided that the distance between intention and execution was a variable worth eliminating entirely. A force that struck the outer barrier of Beerus's planet with a precision that was more alarming than its scale. Because scale could be absorbed, and precision could not be. It found the exact seam in the divine protection surrounding the planet, with the ease of something that had studied the seam from a distance and had come here already knowing where to press. The ground split. A fracture line tore across the training field from the far edge to the center, the earth on either side of it dropping a full meter as the force driving the split refused to exhaust itself. The sound it made was not an explosion. It was deeper than that, more structural, the sound of something load-bearing giving way. Gohan dropped into his stance before the sound finished. Broly turned from the cliff edge with his ki already rising, the legendary aura pulling at the air around him in the involuntary way it did when something in him recognized a threat at the register below conscious thought. Goku was already gone. He crossed the distance to the far edge of the fracture line at a speed that compressed the air in his wake into a pressure wave, arrived at the source of the impact with his fist already moving, and drove everything his body had available into the point where the figure was standing. His fist stopped. The impact traveled back up his arm and through his shoulder and into his spine in the language that bodies use to communicate the difference between force meeting resistance and force meeting something that did not register the distinction between the two. It was not blocked. There was no defensive movement, no redirecting technique, no martial response of any kind. Goku's strike had simply arrived at something that did not move, the way a wave arrives at a cliff face, spending everything it has against something that notes the arrival without being altered by it. He looked up. Kano looked back at him. He was not what the imagination tends to build when it has only descriptions to work from. Not enormous, not visually constructed to communicate threat the way that gods who wear their power on the surface tend to be constructed. He was present in the way that things that have been real for a very long time are present. Without performance, without the need to establish themselves, simply occupying space the way a mountain occupies space, completely without justification as a structural fact of the landscape. His eyes, when they found Goku's, carried something in them that settled into the chest with more weight than hostility would have. Hostility was readable. Hostility had a shape and a logic and a response. What Kano's eyes carried was interest. The genuine, focused, patient interest of an entity who had been thinking about this moment for long enough that its arrival required no adjustment. "Son Goku," he said. His voice was even. The voice of someone for whom the moment had already been processed before it arrived. "I have been looking forward to this for a very long time." Goku pulled his fist back slowly. His arm was numb from the impact, and he was choosing not to examine that too carefully yet. "You're one of them, the ones without origin, among others." Kano's gaze moved, briefly, deliberately, with the thoroughness of a professional assessment, to Beerus, standing at the edge of the platform with his arms folded and his expression communicating several things at once, none of them comfortable. Then back to Goku. "But I did not come for your god of destruction today." "Then what did you come for?" Kano looked only at him when he answered. "To see what you are. not from a distance. Here, directly. His head tilted fractionally. I have watched you for a long time, Son Goku. I have seen you reach things that should not have been reachable. I want to know if what I have been watching is real, or if it only appeared real because I was too far away to see the seams. Vegeta stepped forward from the platform edge. Then you go through me first. Vegeta! Goku's voice was quiet and absolute. No. The silence between them lasted exactly as long as these silences always lasted. Long enough for Vegeta to run every available argument, find the one he could not counter, and compress the losing of it into the particular set of his jaw that meant he was accepting something he intended to revisit later. He stopped. He did not look away. His key eye stayed gathered, present, a promise rather than a threat. Goku turned back to Kano and let Ultra Instinct come. It did not arrive with effort the way it once had. Did not require the pressed, desperate, burning process of reaching through his own limits while everything tried to kill him. It arrived the way things arrive when they have been practiced into the bones. With the ease of return, the body recognizing a state it had visited enough times that the path back to it had worn itself smooth. The silver settled through him like water finding its level, and the weight of everything unnecessary fell away from him with it. Kano watched it happen with an expression that moved, in the smallest possible increment, towards something that could be called recognition, or satisfaction, or both. Good, he said. Show me everything you have. He moved first, and the battle that followed was unlike anything that had happened on Beerus's planet that day, which was saying something significant given what had already happened on Beerus's planet that day. Kano did not fight the way Tigron fought, did not fight the way Beerus fought, or the way anyone in Goku's long catalog of impossible opponents had fought. He fought the way Ligor had fought, with the completeness of someone who had reduced the gap between intention and execution to something functionally imperceptible. But where Ligor had maintained a clinical remove throughout his contest with Beerus, Kano was something different. He was engaged. Genuinely, personally, specifically engaged with Goku in a way that communicated that this was not a professional assessment being conducted at arm's length, but something that mattered to him in a way he had not bothered to conceal. Every exchange he opened carried that quality. Every strike was calibrated not just to force, but to information, aimed at specific things, structured to produce specific responses, as though the combat itself was a language Kano was speaking, and what he was saying with it was a question he had been composing for a very long time. Goku answered in kind. He stopped predicting and started feeling, released the part of his mind that wanted to categorize and anticipate, and handed the conversation entirely to his body, which had been trained for exactly this, which knew things his conscious mind was still catching up to. For 30 seconds, maybe 40, he was inside Kano's rhythm rather than chasing it. He found angles, landed strikes that landed clean and solid and real, moved through spaces that should have closed and arrived in them before they did. Vegeta's breath caught. He did not exhale it. Weiss watched with the particular stillness he reserved for things that deserved his complete and undivided attention. Then Kano adjusted, and adjusted was almost too small a word for what it was. It was a single recalibration, the smallest possible structural change in how he was moving, and it invalidated everything Goku had built in the last 40 seconds as completely as if none of it had been built. The angle that had been available closed. The space that had been accessible sealed. The rhythm that Goku had found revealed itself to have been, in some sense, offered, and was now taken back. Kano's palm connected with Goku's chest, The force in it was not the maximum available. Goku understood that immediately and instinctively, and found it more alarming than if it had been. It was calibrated, precisely, deliberately calibrated to send him backward without destroying what it was sending backward. The way a teacher corrects a student's form with a push rather than a strike, communicating the lesson through the body rather than the voice. He went through the first training platform, through the second, into the cliff face beyond, the rock closing around the impact point with a sound that rolled outward across the entire field. The silence that followed had weight. Gohan was on his feet. Broly had not moved, but his aura had risen without his permission. The legendary power responding to what it had witnessed, with the autonomic urgency of something that did not consult the conscious mind before deciding a situation required its presence. Vegeta stood with his hand extended and his ki gathered, and every calculation he was capable of running in simultaneous operation behind his eyes. Beerus said nothing. He watched the cliff face. Goku came out of the rock. He was bleeding at the temple. His GI was open at the chest, where the palm had landed, and the skin beneath it was already beginning to color with the evidence of the impact. He stood in the rubble with his head slightly lowered, and his breath coming in the measured, deliberate intervals of a fighter managing information rather than simply receiving it, cataloging what his body was reporting with the same focused attention he brought to everything else, setting aside what could be set aside and holding on to what mattered. He was smiling. Not the performance of it, not the forced thing that a fighter manufactures to tell an opponent they haven't landed anything. The genuine article, the smile that arrived when something had genuinely interested him, when the distance between where he was and where he needed to be revealed itself as exactly the kind of distance he had spent his entire life finding reasons to cross. "Okay," he said. His voice was even. "I understand now." Kano tilted his head. "Do you? You're not testing me." Goku wiped the blood from his temple with the back of his hand and looked at it briefly without expression. "You're showing me something. There's a difference." Something moved through Kano's face. Too quick and too layered to read from the outside. The internal revision of an entity whose expectations had been met in a specific way they had not entirely anticipated. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Most fighters who achieve what you have achieved believe they have found the ceiling. The form they have reached feels so far above everything they have known before that they mistake the distance they have traveled for the distance remaining." His eyes did not leave Goku's. They stop growing because they cannot imagine what growing further would even mean. "But I'm not most fighters," Goku said. "No." Something in Kano's voice shifted, barely but perceptibly. "You are something considerably more specific than that, which is why what I am about to tell you matters." He lowered his hands to his sides and stood with the complete stillness of an entity about to say something that had been composed over a very long time. "There is a tournament coming, not the tournament of power, not the contest you just participated in. Something that has no adequate comparison in the vocabulary of anything that has happened in this multiverse before it. Every universe, every reality, perhaps every existence of any kind, gathered and represented in a single convergence." A pause. "And the beings who will compete in it are not the beings you have faced before. The ceiling you have encountered in your experience, Jiren, Broly, Beerus, Ligar, is not the ceiling of what exists. It is not close to the ceiling of what exists." The weight of that settled over the training ground, the way large, true things settle. Slowly, completely, touching everything on the way down. Goku did not look away. And you're here because you need to be more than you currently are. Kano's voice was even and without cruelty, and that made it more unsettling than cruelty would have. Not the next increment, not the next form or the next breakthrough reached under pressure in the final moments of a battle you were about to lose. Categorically, fundamentally more, in a way that begins here, today, with understanding clearly how far you still have to go. He raised one hand, not as preparation for an attack, but with the deliberateness of someone making a point that required physical illustration. I'm going to show you the gap, not describe it. Show it to you in the only language that you have ever truly understood. The air between them changed. The ki radiating from Kano shifted in quality, in texture, in the specific frequency that Goku's body processed as threat assessment. And what it shifted toward had no reference point in anything Goku's experience had given him to work with. It was not God Ki. It was not Ultra Instinct. It was not any combination of those things or any other named category of power. It existed beneath those categories in the same way that the foundation of a structure exists beneath everything built on top of it. Prior to them, more fundamental than them. The thing that everything else was resting on, whether the structure knew it or not. Goku felt every hair on his body respond to it before his mind had finished processing what he was feeling. "Come on then," Goku said. And his voice, when he said it, carried something that had been forged across an entire lifetime of standing in front of things that were larger than him and choosing to stand there anyway. Something that was not bravado and not recklessness, but the specific, quiet, absolute conviction of a fighter who had learned to trust what impossibility felt like from the inside. Because from the inside was where he had always found what he needed to meet it. They moved at the same moment. The collision was not heard so much as felt. Pressure arriving in the chest a full second before the sound reached the ears. The air between the impact point and everyone watching compressing and then releasing outward in a ring that carved new damage into the already devastated training ground. Gohan braced. Broly absorbed the pressure wave without moving, his feet finding purchase in the fractured earth with the ease of a body built to stand in weather that moved other bodies. What followed was not a series of exchanges. It was a single, sustained conversation conducted at a speed and intensity that compressed everything. Strategy, instinct, desperation, revelation, the accumulated weight of every choice that had led both of them to this specific point on this specific ruined ground, into a continuous present tense that had no room in it for the past or the future. Goku gave everything. Not most of it. Not the version of everything that kept something in reserve for the moment after. The fighter's habit of never fully committing because full commitment is the same as vulnerability. Everything. The decision to give it was not conscious. It was the response of a body that had been pushed to the edge of its current form and understood, at a level below language, that the edge of the current form was exactly where the answer to the question being posed was located. He pressed into Kano with a fury that was not anger. Anger was a narrowing, and this was an opening, a total widening of every channel available to him. And the force he produced in that state was something that made Vegeta's eyes change. For a moment, 3 seconds, perhaps 4, the longest 4 seconds on that training ground in an hour of long seconds. Kano was pushed back, not defeated, not overwhelmed. Pushed back, a single step, the ground beneath his foot compressing with the weight of someone absorbing a genuine and significant force and redistributing it through his foundation rather than being moved by it. But a step, real, physical, undeniable. Weiss exhaled. Beerus, standing at the edge of the platform, did something he almost never did in moments like these. He looked at Goku with an expression that carried, beneath the analytical precision, something that could only be described as recognition. The look of someone watching another person do what they themselves had just done hours ago. Reach for something at the absolute limit of what was currently available to them and find that the reaching itself changed the available. Then Kano found his footing. He did not accelerate into a counterattack. He simply stopped absorbing and started returning, redirected the force Goku had generated against him back through the contact point between them with the clean, efficient precision of someone who had been waiting for the force to reach its maximum before responding to it. The reversal traveled through Goku's body before his nervous system had finished processing the change in momentum, and the strike that followed it arrived in the space that the reversal had created. A single blow, placed with the surgical exactness of something that had been aimed not at the body, but at the specific structural point where the current form's endurance was thinnest. Goku hit the ground on both knees. The impact sent a crack outward through the fractured earth beneath him. He stayed there for a moment, hands pressed against the ground, head down, breathing. The breath more ragged than he would have preferred, but steady enough. Staying steady by the specific act of will that had kept him breathing through more impossible moments than he could accurately count. The pain was significant, and he was not going to pretend otherwise to himself. The exhaustion was real. The gap between what he had given and what it had been sufficient for was as clear and measurable as the ground pressing back against his palms. He pressed his fists into the earth and pushed himself upright. One knee, then the other. Then standing, barely, with everything it cost, made completely visible in every line of his body. No performance left in him to spend on concealing the state of things. Simply standing because it was what he did and what he had always done, and what he could not find a reason to stop doing. He looked at Kano across the space between them. Kano looked back, and what moved through Kano's expression in that moment was something that had not been there before, something that arrived slowly, the way comprehension arrives when it is being revised in real time. When the entity doing the revising has encountered something that is performing differently than every prior model predicted. It was not surprise exactly. It was something more specific than surprise. The look of a being who had come here with a clear and fully formed picture of what Son Goku was, and was now watching that picture be quietly and comprehensively dismantled from the inside. "You should not still be standing," Kano said, not as a taunt, as a structural observation, a fact being noted by a mind that had accounted for most variables and was identifying the one it had not adequately weighted. "Yeah," Goku said. His voice was rough at the edges. "I know. I hit you at the exact threshold of your current form's structural endurance. The force was calibrated specifically to produce a conclusion. I know that too." A silence. "Why are you still standing?" Kano asked. And the question was genuine, not rhetorical, not theatrical. A god who had traveled across the omniverse with a specific question in mind and had just watched the answer begin to reveal itself in a way that his models had not predicted, and was now asking directly for the variable he had underestimated. Goku thought about it for a moment. Not performing the thinking, actually doing it, actually reaching for the honest answer the way he reached for everything, without decoration. "Because I haven't found it yet," he said. "The thing you said I need to find. It's there. I can feel where it is. But I haven't reached it yet. And I can't stop in the middle of looking for it." The silence that followed was different from the silences that had come before it. It had a specific quality, the quality of something having shifted in the architecture of the moment, some variable having been revised that changed the weight distribution of everything resting on top of it. Kano was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then he said, and his voice had changed in the way that voices change when the person speaking them has moved from one mode into another, from the mode of combat into something more fundamental than combat. I came here to show you the gap. I have shown you the gap. But there is something else I did not plan to offer when I arrived. Something that the battle itself has made me reconsider. His eyes held Goku's with the steadiness of someone who had made a decision and was not uncertain about it. You said you can feel where it is. The thing that is still ahead of you. Yeah. Show me where you feel it. Goku blinked. It was not the response he had been assembling for. He turned the request over for a moment, feeling for what it was actually asking because it was clearly asking something more specific than the surface of the words suggested. Then he closed his eyes. He reached inward, past the pain, past the exhaustion, past the loud and insistent reporting of a body that had been pushed well past its preferences, and found the thing he had been feeling at the edge of his coup since the moment Kano had first redirected his force back through him. It was not a form. It was not ultra instinct at a higher volume or God Ki at a greater concentration or any combination of named things compressed into a smaller space. It was something that existed at the point where all of those things ran out. The place on the other side of the current ceiling, visible only from the ceiling itself. Only from the specific vantage point of someone who had pressed against the limit hard enough and long enough that the limit had become transparent. He reached for it. His ki shifted, not transformed, not the clean, dramatic shift of a breakthrough achieved. Something more preliminary than that. The first movement of something very large that had been still for a very long time. The initial turn of something that would require much more than this moment to complete its rotation. But real. Physically, undeniably, measurably real. The aura around him changing in a frequency that made Whis go completely still and made Vegeta take an involuntary step forward and made Beerus narrow his eyes with the expression he wore when something had exceeded the boundaries of what he had been prepared to see. Gohan said his name quietly, like someone checking that what they were seeing was in fact what they were seeing. Kano watched it with the expression of someone who has been carrying a very specific hope for a very long time and is watching it become a fact. The shift lasted 4 seconds. Then Goku's breath broke, the effort of sustaining it at that point requiring more than what remained in him after everything the battle had already taken, and the aura settled back to its previous state, and Goku stood in the aftermath of it with his chest heaving and his eyes still closed, and the particular expression of someone who has briefly touched something and had it taken away before they could hold on to it. He opened his eyes. That, Kano said quietly, is what you need to find your way back to, and what you need to learn to sustain. He paused. It exists in you. It has always existed in you. You were built in a way that made its presence inevitable, though nothing in your lineage or your training fully accounts for why. The path to it runs through everything you have not yet been pushed past. Another pause, longer than the first. The tournament will push you past all of it. Whether you survive that pushing depends entirely on how much of the distance you close before it begins. Goku held his gaze. How long do we have? Kano's answer arrived with a weight that had nothing performed in it. A weight that came from its content rather than its delivery. Less time than you need, he said. More time than you think. The silence that settled after that occupied the space of several breaths before anyone broke it. The training ground lay ruined around them, cracked and scored and reshaped by everything that had passed through it in the last several hours. The evidence of multiple impossible battles written into the earth in a language of fractures and displaced stone. The sky above it was unchanged. The light was the same. Goku looked at it, at all of it, with the expression he wore when something had genuinely and completely rearranged what he understood about a situation. Not overwhelmed by it, not diminished by it. The opposite of that, in the specific way that only Son Goku managed the opposite of being diminished. As though the larger the thing that had been revealed, the more clearly he could see what it was asking of him, and the more completely he intended to answer. He looked back at Kano. "Then we'd better get started," he said. Kano studied him for a moment across the settling dust of the ruined ground. Then, for the first time since his arrival on Beerus's planet, something in his expression moved toward what could only be described as approval. Quiet, guarded. The approval of a god who did not offer it easily and had not expected to be offering it here, and was finding that the offering of it was the most honest response available to what he was looking at. He raised his hand. A single concentrated sphere of energy formed above his palm. Not enormous, not the scale of the forces that had been exchanged in the battle, but dense in a way that communicated everything the scale did not. Compressed into a point. Aimed with the precision of something that had been calibrated over the course of the entire contest to the exact frequency of Goku's current limit. "One more exchange," Kano said. "Everything you have toward the thing you felt. Don't reach for Ultra Instinct. Don't reach for God Ki. Reach for what you touched just now and hold it as long as your body will allow." Goku exhaled, settled his feet into the fractured earth, let his hands fall to his sides. "And if I can't hold it? Then you fall," Kano said simply. "And you get up, and we find out how many times you can do that before the distance closes." The sphere above his palm began to rotate. Goku felt it approaching before it was released. Felt it in the same place he had felt everything that mattered in this battle. In the register below language. In the part of him that had been trained not to think, but to know. He reached for what he had touched 4 seconds ago, in the space between one version of himself and whatever came next. Reached for it the way a drowning person reaches for air. Not because reaching was guaranteed to produce the result, but because the alternative to reaching was not something he had ever been able to make himself accept. The sphere left Kano's hand. Goku's aura exploded outward, and the light that followed consumed everything. Far across the Omniverse, in the dark and nameless place where no light reached, Megalodorus stood alone and watched the distant flare of it through senses that required no physical medium to function. He was quiet for a long time after the flare had settled, longer than his usual contemplation of any single event, which was itself notable, since Megalodorus had outlasted the patience of most gods he had known. Then he said, to no one present, in the particular tone of an entity revising an assumption it had held for a very long time. Interesting. He turned away from the distant light of Universe 7 and moved deeper into the dark. The Great King's tournament was coming, and somewhere in the ruins of a training ground on a small planet at the edge of the known multiverse, something that had been still for a very long time had just barely begun to move. The light took a long time to settle. Not the physical light that collapsed in the first second, the aura folding back into Goku the way a tide folds back from a shore, leaving the ground beneath it changed and scored and rearranged, but no longer actively burning. That settled quickly. What took longer was everything else. The frequency that had passed through the training ground, through the bodies of everyone standing on it, through the specific register below sound and light that the body processes before the mind has assembled the question. That took longer. That took the kind of time that cannot be measured in seconds, because it is not a physical event, but a settling of a different kind. The kind that happens inside a person when something very large and very real has passed through them and left them on the other side of it. Kano was gone. He had not left the way most beings left. No movement toward a direction. No compression of distance between here and somewhere else. No departure that the eye could track and the mind could follow. He had simply ceased to occupy the space he had been occupying, the way a fact ceases to occupy the space of speculation once it has been confirmed, completely, without residue, leaving behind only the evidence of what it had been while it was present. The fracture lines across the training ground, the displaced stone, the specific shape of the damage in the cliff face where Goku had been driven into the rock and had come back out of it still standing. The evidence was everywhere. Goku looked at none of it. He stood in the center of the ruined ground, with his feet planted in the fractured earth, and his eyes on the space where Kano had been, and his breathing coming in the slow, deliberate intervals of a fighter cataloging what had just happened with the same focused attention he had brought to cataloging the fight itself. Not processing. Processing implied something passive, information arriving and being received. This was more active than that. This was Goku doing what he always did in the aftermath of something that had genuinely rearranged his understanding, turning it over in his hands, finding every edge, learning the shape of it from the inside. Vegeta spoke first. Goku. It came out quieter than Vegeta intended it to. He did not repeat it. He crossed the ruined ground with the economy of movement that long experience had made automatic, arriving at the space beside Goku without drama, without announcement, and standing there in the specific way that Vegeta stood beside Goku when he had things to say and had not yet decided whether to say them. Close enough that the decision to speak required only a small movement, far enough that silence was still a viable option. He looked at the damage, at the cliff face, at the fracture line that ran from the far edge of the training ground to the center. The earth on either side dropped and displaced, and permanently altered. "How bad?" he said. Not a question exactly. The phrasing of someone who already had an estimate and was asking for the gap between the estimate and the reality. "Bad enough," Goku said. He moved his right shoulder slowly, testing the range, finding the specific location where the numbness from the first blocked strike had settled into something heavier and less temporary. Not as bad as it should be. Vegeta's jaw moved in the particular way it moved when he was revising an internal figure. "I watched you block his first strike. I didn't block it. Your fist stopped." "My fist stopped," Goku agreed. "His momentum didn't. There's a difference." He lowered his arm and let it hang at his side with the loose easiness of someone who had made a professional decision to stop examining the damage until he had a better reason to examine it. He let it stop. He was deciding how much information to give me at the beginning. Vegeta was quiet for a moment. Then, he calibrated the entire fight. "Yeah. Including the end?" "Yeah." A silence. The weight of that settled between them, the way large facts settle between people who have been in enough genuine danger together to have stopped performing their responses to it. Simply present, simply real, requiring no decoration. "What did you feel?" Vegeta said. "At the end, before the sphere landed." Goku turned that over for a moment. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because the answer was imprecise in a way that bothered him. Not wrong, just not sharp enough yet. The way a shape seen through fog is the shape, but not the detail. Like the next room was right there, he said finally. Not a metaphor, literally. Like I was standing in one room and I could feel the door to the next one. Could feel the difference in temperature through the wall. Could almost reach the handle. He paused, and then my body ran out and I couldn't hold on to it. But you felt it. I felt it. Vegeta said nothing for a long moment. His eyes moved to the horizon, to the place where the sky met the edge of the planet, unchanged by everything that had happened beneath it. Patient and indifferent in the way that large things are patient and indifferent. Then he said, without looking at Goku, in the voice he used when he was saying something that cost him something to say, I felt it too, when your aura shifted. A pause. From here. Goku looked at him. It was 4 seconds. Vegeta continued, still not looking back. 4 seconds and it was already past everything I've seen from you. Past Ultra Instinct, past the divine form, past everything that has a name that I know. He stopped, started again. I have been trying to define the ceiling of your potential for 20 years. I have revised that definition more times than I am going to count. What I felt in those 4 seconds is going to require another revision. He said it without bitterness. That was the part that communicated the most. Not the content, but the absence of bitterness in it. Vegeta without bitterness about Goku's ceiling was Vegeta, in a particular state that Goku had learned to read carefully, because it only arrived when Vegeta had encountered something large enough that the competition ceased to be the point. You're not going to say it's impossible, Goku said. I stopped saying things are impossible approximately 8 tournaments ago, Vegeta said. He finally turned and looked at Goku with the direct, assessing gaze he reserved for situations that required honesty more than composure. But I am going to say that 4 seconds is not enough. Whatever that was, it needs to be minutes, hours, permanent eventually. He held Goku's gaze. We don't have the time to reach permanent, so the question is how close we can get. We, Goku said. We, Vegeta confirmed, in a tone that closed the subject. Beerus had not moved from the edge of the platform. He stood with his arms folded and his tail curled behind him with the specific stillness he occupied when he was processing something that he had not expected to need to process. The stillness of a god of destruction whose model of a situation had been updated in a direction that required the recalibration of several adjacent assumptions. His eyes were on the space where Kano had been. His expression was the expression of someone looking at a thing that has already gone, but whose presence has left the air around its former location subtly and unmistakably changed. Whis stood beside him in the composed, attending silence he maintained when Beerus was thinking and had not yet decided to speak. Whis, Beerus said. Yes, Lord Beerus. The being that just left this planet. Kano, Whis confirmed. How far above me was he? The question was asked with a flatness that had nothing theatrical in it. No wound, no performance of equanimity. Simply a straightforward request for accurate information from someone who had decided that accurate information was more useful than comfortable information and had made that decision cleanly, without apparent cost. Weiss considered his answer with the care that the question deserved. In raw power, he said, considerably. The gap between your current ceiling and his demonstrated output is meaningful, not insurmountable in absolute terms, but meaningful in practical ones. He paused. In refinement, in the degree to which he has integrated his power with his instinct and his intent, The gap is larger than the power gap. He has been what he is for a very long time. You have been what you are for a comparatively short one. Beerus absorbed this without expression. And the others, the ones who went to the other targets. I cannot speak to their exact capabilities, but if Kano is representative of the group, Weiss left the sentence unfinished in the particular way he left sentences unfinished when the completion was something he preferred the listener to arrive at independently. Beerus arrived at it. The tournament, he said. Yes. Liger said prepare. Kano said prepare. Beerus's tail moved once, the slow, deliberate movement of an entity working through something with its whole body, not just its mind. Both of them. Different origins, different purposes, same message. That does seem to be the recurring note, yes. Beerus turned away from the damage and looked at Whis directly. Is there something you have not told me? The question was quiet, and it had a specific quality. The quality that questions have when the person asking them is not asking whether there is something they haven't been told, but signaling that they have already concluded that there is and are offering the person being asked an opportunity to produce it voluntarily. Wise held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through his expression, too controlled to read fully. The internal adjustment of an angel managing the boundary between what it was permitted to say and what it understood. There are things, Whis said carefully, that are not mine to tell. Not because I have been instructed to withhold them, but because certain truths require the person receiving them to have reached a specific threshold before they can be received without being distorted by the receiving. He paused. Son Goku's body understood something today that his mind has not yet finished processing. When the processing is complete, when what he touched in those 4 seconds has a form he can hold and examine, some of what I know will become relevant. Until then, sharing it would only add noise. Beerus looked at him for a long moment. That is the most words you have ever used to tell me almost nothing. I know, Whis said pleasantly. I felt the occasion warranted it. Gohan found his father sitting at the far edge of what remained of the training platform, the section that had stayed intact, the narrow strip of level ground at the eastern edge where the fracture lines had stopped before reaching. Goku was sitting the way he had been sitting before all of it started, legs over the edge, hands loose in his lap, eyes half closed. Different, though. The posture was the same. The quality of the stillness inside it was different. The way a room is different after something significant has happened in it. Not physically altered, but carrying the event in its atmosphere in a way that changes what it means to be inside it. Gohan sat down beside him without asking. For a while, neither of them said anything. Below the edge of the platform, the ruined training ground fell away. All that fractured stone and displaced earth, all that evidence. Above it, the sky was unchanged. Between the two, the specific quiet of a place that has been through something and is resting. Dad, Gohan said. What did it feel like? The 4 seconds. Goku was quiet for a moment, not reluctant, just finding the right entry point into something that was not yet fully language. You remember when you were a kid, he said. First time you went Super Saiyan in the hyperbolic time chamber. Gohan nodded. Before it happened, before the transformation, before all of it, there was a moment where you could feel it was possible. Not certain, not close. Just possible. Like a door you didn't know was there and suddenly you could feel the air coming through the gap underneath it. Goku's eyes stayed on the horizon. It was like that, but the door was already open, and I was standing in the light from it. And then, he stopped. And then I ran out of what I needed to stay there. He said it without frustration, without the performance of not being frustrated, which would have meant the frustration was present. Simply as a fact, an accurate report of the current state of things, delivered the way he delivered everything that was accurate and real. But I know where it is now. I can feel where it is. He paused. That's actually more than I've had before most of the big ones. Gohan looked at his father for a long moment.